Imagine a solitary rider just galloping through a blinding snowstorm across the really rugged mountains of ancient Turkey.
Oh, setting the scene. I like
Right. So he reaches this fortified outpost, leaps off his totally exhausted horse, immediately jumps onto a fresh one, and just vanishes back into the storm.
no breaks at all.
None. And through a continuous relay of riders just like him, a message actually travels from the edge of Europe all the way to southern Iran in just 7 days.
Which is, frankly, mind-blowing for the time.
Exactly. I mean, it sounds like a scene from a fantasy novel, but this was a daily reality.
Yeah, it really was.
And when you look around at the sheer complexity of our modern, hyper-connected world, you might assume that globalized administration like managing supply chains and rapid communication is a strictly modern invention.
Right. People think you need fiber optic cables for that.
Yeah, or jet engines. We tend to think this level of coordination simply couldn't exist back then.
Well, it is a very natural assumption to make. We often conflate technological advancement with administrative sophistication.
Oh, for sure.
We assume the modern machinery is what makes the management possible, but the sources we are looking at today completely challenge that notion.
They really do. And that's why we're opening up a remarkable set of documents and historical research today surrounding something called the Persian blueprint.
Yes, a fascinating topic.
Our mission in this deep dive is to explore the 6th century BC, specifically the Achaemenid Empire of Persia. And I want to be clear with you right off the bat, we aren't just doing a leisurely tour of some dusty ancient ruins here.
No, definitely not.
We are looking at a 3-continent incubator for technological and administrative innovation, centered around the ancient cities of Susa and Persepolis.
And that framing is just so essential for anyone listening who feels, I don't know, entirely overwhelmed by the friction of managing a modern business or just navigating civic life. There is profound value in this blueprint.
Oh, absolutely.
It reveals how a specific civilization managed an unprecedented, wildly heterogeneous mass of peoples, languages, and religions, all without the internet.
Or combustion engines, right?
Yeah, exactly. Without combustion engines and without modern computing power.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand how radical the Persian approach was, we have to look at what came immediately before them, right?
Right, the older empires.
Yeah, if you look at the traditional Assyrian or Babylonian models of empire building, it was essentially the ancient equivalent of a hostile corporate takeover.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, the new boss kicks down the door, fires the entire staff, burns the employee handbook, and demands absolute compliance.
And in the ancient world, that usually translated to mass deportations.
Exactly. Conquerors deliberately erased local cultures just to force everyone into a single homogenized block of obedience. The whole system relied entirely on fragile compliance, fueled basically by terror.
Which brings us to a massive pivot introduced by Cyrus the Great in 539 BC. This is right after his conquest of the Neo-Babylonian Empire.
Right.
What's fascinating here is that Cyrus looked at that hostile takeover model, with its forced migrations and cultural destruction, and he recognized it as incredibly inefficient.
Because governing by terror is expensive.
Oh, hugely. It requires a massive military presence just to maintain the status quo, and frankly, it constantly breeds resentment and rebellion.
Makes sense.
So he introduced a totally different mechanism. He actually issued a physical manifesto carved onto a clay drum, which historians now call the Cyrus cylinder.
And that cylinder's famous. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
very. Because instead of declaring cultural annihilation, it explicitly promoted religious tolerance and cultural continuity.
And the sources emphasize that he actually followed through on this, too. It wasn't just like a political bluff.
No, he really did it.
He instituted a policy of strategic repatriation. He actively mandated the return of deported peoples to their original homelands.
Right, and that famously included allowing the Jewish people who had been exiled in Babylon to return to Jerusalem.
Yeah, and to rebuild the Second Temple.
Exactly. And that decision really established a core ideological concept in the Achaemenid model. The official Persian term for this was Vispasana.
Vispasana, which means what exactly?
It roughly translates to comprising all tribes. So unlike their predecessors who saw local diversity as a dangerous threat that needed to be crushed, the Achaemenid state explicitly recognized diversity as the very source of their imperial power.
It is genuinely fascinating to observe how that administrative philosophy from 539 BC kind of echoes across millennia.
It really does.
Yeah, our sources impartially note that this specific model of structural loyalty where a central authority derives stability by protecting traditions rather than erasing them, is actually cited as directly inspiring much later thinkers.
Like Thomas Jefferson.
Exactly, Thomas Jefferson, as he considered the frameworks of modern republics.
Yeah.
But I have to push back a little here.
Go for it.
When you look at Cyrus, was this true enlightened altruism? Or was it just a highly calculated PR move by a really smart conqueror?
Well, it is an excellent question. And to find the answer, we can actually track the linguistic shifts in their own internal administrative records over time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So under Darius I, the royal inscriptions proudly proclaimed rule over Vispasana all tribes.
Right.
But later, under Xerxes I, the empire suffered some significant territorial losses following the Greco-Persian Wars.
Okay, so they shrank a bit.
Exactly. And the official terminology pragmatically downgraded in response.
Wait, they changed the word.
They did. The inscriptions shifted from Vispasana to a new word, Paruzana, which translates to comprising many tribes.
Oh, wow, I see. So it wasn't some rigid utopian dogma that they just blindly adhered to.
Precisely. They lost territory to the Greeks, so they could no longer accurately claim to rule all tribes.
Right, that would just be factually wrong.
Yeah. The shift to Paruzana proves this wasn't blind altruism. It was a realistic, pragmatic philosophy of power that adapted to the geopolitical realities on the ground.
That makes total sense. But letting people keep their local culture and religion is brilliant for keeping the peace. Logically, though, it creates a massive logistical nightmare.
Oh, total nightmare.
Right, because if you have an empire stretching from Egypt to India, filled with dozens of different cultures speaking different languages, how do you actually communicate?
You really can't, not easily.
Exactly. Governing a fractured multilingual world requires a serious upgrade in administration.
You need a completely new operating system for your bureaucracy. Up to this point, the standard method for royal administration was traditional cuneiform on heavy clay tablets.
And just to clarify for anyone unfamiliar, cuneiform involved pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay, using a reed stylus, and then, letting that heavy clay dry in the sun.
Right.
If we use a modern analogy, running an empire on clay tablets is like trying to manage a multinational corporation where every single email has to be carved into a concrete brick.
And then physically driven across the country.
Exactly. It was a massive administrative bottleneck.
It required highly specialized scribes and just immense physical storage space. So to solve this, the Persians elevated a language called Imperial Aramaic to be the official chancery language of the entire empire.
And what made Aramaic so special?
Well, Imperial Aramaic used a simple alphabetical script, and crucially, it was written on lightweight papyrus.
That is a phenomenal upgrade. Moving from heavy clay bricks to lightweight papyrus is like upgrading from a room-sized mainframe computer to carrying around a lightweight flash drive.
That's exactly what it was like.
You suddenly have this streamlined universal alphabet that vastly improves the speed of administration. But, even with papyrus, you still face the physical barrier of geography. You have to move that message from point A to point B.
And that required the deployment of unprecedented physical hardware. They built a continuous, heavily guarded network known as the Chapar Khaneh.
And the scale of this road system is just staggering. They built a route stretching over 2,500 kilometers from Susa, in modern-day Iran, all the way to Sardis, in modern-day Turkey.
The engineering of the relay mechanic is what really made the Chapar Khaneh function so beautifully.
How so?
Well, they placed post stations exactly 1 day's hard ride apart. That's about every 15 to 25 miles along that entire 2,500-kilometer stretch. Royal couriers, known as the Angarium, would ride at breakneck speed, arise at a station, and instantly swap an exhausted horse for a fresh one.
Right, which brings us back to that guy in the snowstorm from the intro.
Exactly.
By doing this continuously, taking absolutely no breaks, those messages could cross 3 continents in just 7 to 9 days.
Which is incredible.
It is. The Greek historian Herodotus actually documented this network. He wrote that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stayed these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds.
Sounds familiar, right?
Very. That description of the Angarium eventually inspired the unofficial motto of the modern U.S. Postal Service.
It's a great connection.
But for all this speed, sometimes they needed to communicate something permanently. They didn't just use papyrus for everything.
Oh, certainly not.
When King Darius I wanted to leave a permanent record, he had it carved into a cliff face at a site called Behistun. And get this, it was 66 meters above the ground. That's literally a 20-story drop.
And it is the world's longest trilingual cuneiform record, written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian.
Oh, cool.
And the engineering logic behind the Behistun monument is brilliant. Placing it at that incredibly inaccessible height served a dual purpose.
Okay, what was the first?
First, it ensured absolute protection from vandalism. I mean, nobody is casually scaling 66 meters of sheer rock to deface a royal decree.
Fair point. And the second?
Second, despite being physically out of reach, it was positioned to remain highly visible to all travelers moving along the vital trade route between Babylon and Ecbatana.
So it basically functions as an indestructible ancient billboard.
It did, and it served a vital political utility. Darius I came to power following a period of massive instability, which was caused by a usurper named Gamata.
Ah, okay.
The Behistun inscription permanently and visibly legitimized Darius's rule. It was this unerasable assertion of authority looking down over the empire's main artery.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The physical network of roads carried messages and emissaries across the empire. But when those foreign dignitaries finally arrived at the capital, how do you visually convince them that they are part of a unified, harmonious world order?
A very tricky problem.
Yeah, and practically speaking, how do you even sustain these massive administrative palace hubs in extreme, arid desert environments?
The Persians solved both problems simultaneously through an extraordinary synthesis of architecture. They used palace design as high-fidelity visual data, and they deployed extreme environmental engineering to master the landscape.
Okay, let's look at the visual data first. The palatial wall designs at Persepolis were essentially ancient infographics. We call it a speaking stone layout.
Yeah, the emissaries would arrive at a monumental intercontinental gathering hub called the Gate of All Nations.
And what did that look like?
Notice the psychology of the design here. The entrances were guarded by massive Assyrian lamassu.
Those are the intimidating winged bulls with human heads, right?
Exactly. The architects were deliberately synthesizing foreign architectural styles from conquered lands to represent a newly integrated world order.
Wow, that's clever.
Then, emissaries would proceed into a square waiting hall supported by 4 monumental bell-based columns. This functioned as a security checkpoint, but also as a ritualistic staging ground where foreigners mingled before entering the main audience hall.
And as they walked through these spaces, they were literally reading the walls. The architects alternated smooth blocks of text with incredibly detailed bas-reliefs.
And for those who might not know, a bas-relief is a type of sculpture where the figures are carved to stand out slightly from a flat background stone.
Right, and the level of ethnographic accuracy in these carvings is staggering. The reliefs depicted 28 different subject peoples.
28? That's a lot of detail.
Yeah. The sculptors carved their distinct native dress, their specific regional weapons, and their unique gifts. The detail is so precise that modern historians actively use these carvings as primary data sources to understand ancient clothing and trade.
The imagery visually proved the empire's power, but what's key is that it did so without humiliation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, interwoven motifs, like the lotus flower, continually reinforced visual themes of purity and eternity. The king wasn't depicted as a brutal oppressor crushing his enemies underfoot, which was, the standard motif for earlier empires.
Right, the Assyrians loved that kind of stuff.
They sure did. But here, he was portrayed as the rightful, unifying ruler of a harmonious community of nations.
The palace sounds incredible, and it visually reinforces this theme of inclusion. But practically, Persepolis was built in an arid plain.
Yes, very dry.
You simply cannot run an intercontinental empire if your capital city runs out of drinking water.
Which brings us to one of their greatest engineering marvels, the Qanats.
Okay, what are Qanats?
To survive the brutal desert climate, Persian engineers developed highly sophisticated subterranean aqueducts. Instead of relying on unpredictable surface rivers that would quickly dry up, they tapped directly into the groundwater situated deep at the base of the surrounding mountains.
The mechanics of how they move that water are brilliant. They dug gently sloping tunnels underground. Gravity naturally pulled the water from the mountain aquifer down toward the city.
Exactly.
By keeping the water flowing deep underground rather than in open canals, they almost entirely eliminated the threat of evaporation under the harsh desert sun.
And vertical access shafts were dug along the route every few dozen meters.
What were those for?
Mostly to provide ventilation and allow workers to clear out silt. This system provided a massive, consistent volume of water year-round in places that should have been totally uninhabitable.
That magical water supply allowed them to create lush, walled desert gardens. And the old Persian word for these highly engineered oasis settlements was paradisa.
Paradisa.
Yeah, which is the direct etymological origin of our modern word paradise. They literally use hydroengineering to build paradise in the desert.
It's beautiful. But their mastery of thermodynamics extended beyond just liquid water. They also built structures called yakhchal.
Yeah.
Yes. They utilized evaporative cooling to harvest and store ice right in the middle of the desert.
Wait, harvesting ice in the desert in 500 BC, that sounds impossible. How did that actually work?
Well, the engineering relies on understanding heat transfer. Step one was winter harvesting. Water from the Qanats was channeled into shallow external trenches that were completely shielded by high walls from the ambient heat radiation of the sun.
Okay, so they blocked the sun.
Right. And during the freezing desert nights, that shallow water would freeze solid.
Smart.
Step 2 workers transported the harvested ice into a deep subterranean pit beneath a massive conical dome. This structure operated on the principle of thermal stratification.
Because cold air naturally sinks.
Exactly. So the subterranean pit remained continually chilled, naturally insulated by the earth itself.
I am fascinated by the construction of that dome, though. The walls of the yakhchal were up to 2 meters thick at the base for extreme insulation.
That's serious thickness.
Yeah, and our sources list the ingredients for the mortar used to build it. It wasn't just mud. It was a specific mixture of sand, clay, ash, goat hair, and egg whites.
Egg whites.
Right. Now, I have to ask about the chemistry here. How does a civilization figure out that adding egg whites, literally a breakfast ingredient, creates high-grade thermal insulation for a building?
It points to a profound culture of trial and error and empirical material science. They needed a mortar that was completely impermeable to water.
Because if it gets wet, the insulation fails.
Precisely. Any moisture seeping into the walls would compromise the insulation. The proteins in egg whites act as a powerful, water-resistant binding agent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when mixed with the other materials, it essentially creates an ancient, highly durable organic polymer. The result was that the royal court enjoyed cold drinks and crucial food preservation right through the absolute peak of the summer heat.
That is just wild. But creating paradise in the desert, building intercontinental post offices, employing armies of scribes, this infrastructure costs an absolute fortune.
Oh, an unimaginable amount of money.
How did the Achaemenids actually fund all of this without resorting to the oppressive tribute systems that caused previous empires to inevitably rebel?
That is the crucial economic pivot. The Achaemenid solution was systemic standardization. They transformed the mafia-style shakedowns of the past into the world's first predictable global economy.
Okay, so how did they do that?
Well, there are 3 pillars to this system. The first is guaranteed currency. King Darius introduced the gold daric and the silver siglos.
Because these coins had guaranteed purity levels backed by the state, right?
Yeah.
They became the first universally accepted trade currencies in the ancient world.
Exactly.
You could trade a daric in Egypt or in India, and the merchant knew exactly what it was worth.
And pillar 2 was universal weights. To harmonize trade across massive bazaars from Memphis to Babylon, the empire mass-produced standardized weights. Interestingly, these were often cast from bronze and carved into the shape of lions.
I actually want to highlight the mechanics of why they used bronze lions.
Oh, it's a great detail.
In ancient markets, a common way to cheat someone was to shave a tiny bit of metal off a generic square weight, making it slightly lighter.
A classic scam.
Right. But by casting the weights as highly detailed bronze lions, any attempt to shave or alter the metal would deform the shape of the lion, instantly revealing the fraud.
It was a brilliant, built-in anti-counterfeiting measure that enforced standardization across 3 continents.
And pillar 3, the big one, was fixed taxation. Darius abolished the old system of arbitrary tribute. He replaced it with fixed annual taxes for each satrapy or province.
And these taxes were carefully calculated based on that specific region's agricultural and economic capacity.
Because citizens knew exactly what they owed the government every year, they could actually plan long-term businesses.
Right, which is huge.
This stable, predictable economy generated immense wealth, which the state then reinvested into mega-engineering waterways that fundamentally redefined military logistics and global trade.
And the scale of these waterways is genuinely astonishing. Darius I actually completed the Canal of the Pharaohs, which was the ancient precursor to the modern Suez Canal.
Wait, really? How big was it?
It was roughly 150 kilometers long and 45 meters wide, To put that in perspective, it was wide enough to fit two massive triremes, which were massive ancient warships featuring three distinct rows of oars rowing side by side.
Wow, that's massive.
Yeah, and it linked the Mediterranean Sea directly to the Red Sea.
So compare that permanent trade route to the Suez Canal, engineered later under Xerxes I. This was a purely military installation.
Oh, entirely.
It was a 2-kilometer-long, 30-meter-wide shortcut cut directly through the isthmus of the Mount Athos Peninsula in Greece. Xerxes built it simply to bypass a dangerous cape that had previously destroyed a Persian fleet.
And the sources mention they excavated it using incredibly innovative bucket chain.
I saw that. How did that technology work?
A bucket chain is an endless loop of containers attached to a massive wooden wheel. As the wheel is turned by human or animal power, the buckets continually dip into the earth or mud, scoop it up, and dump it at the top of the rotation.
That makes sense.
It allowed for rapid, continuous excavation. The key difference here is that the Athos Canal was meant to be temporary.
It was just a one-way military shortcut.
Exactly. After the fleet passed through, it was intentionally allowed to silt up. It really demonstrates a state with so much capital and engineering prowess that they could casually carve through a peninsula just for a single military campaign.
This incredible incubator of stability and wealth produced cultural and scientific exports that far outlasted the empire itself, too.
They left quite a legacy.
Academic medicine flourished here, laying the roots for structured hospital systems that ultimately culminated in the famous Academy of Gandhishapur.
We also see the origins of sophisticated leisure.
Like,
Well, early forms of chess and backgammon, like a game called Nard. Their textile engineering is exemplified by the Pazyryk carpet, which is the world's oldest surviving knotted carpet, and it clearly bears Achaemenid motifs.
but the most debated export has to be the experimental technology, specifically the anomalies known as the Baghdad battery.
Oh, yes. The Baghdad battery consists of clay jars containing copper cylinders and iron rods, which were suspended in an acidic electrolyte liquid, most likely vinegar.
From a pure chemistry standpoint, placing two different metals like copper and iron into an acidic solution creates a flow of electrons,
Which is the basic definition of a galvanic cell.
or a battery.
Yeah.
Now, scientists are still fiercely debating what these were actually used for. Were they used for electroplating thin layers of gold onto silver jewelry, or did they just provide a mild electrical tingle for religious rituals?
The debate continues, yeah.
But the mere fact that the components for a galvanic cell existed in this era shows a civilization engaging in serious boundary-pushing experimentation.
If we connect this all to the bigger picture, what we are really analyzing today is the Achaemenid formula.
Okay, let's hear it.
It is a three-part mechanism for sustainable imperial hegemony. First, massive infrastructure. The physical roads, the Qanats, the intercontinental canals bound the physical geography together.
Right.
Second, cultural autonomy. The administrative philosophy of Vespasiana generated structural loyalty from the bottom up. And third, systemic standardization. A universal language, fixed coinage, and universally enforced weights created a frictionless, predictable economy.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look at the blueprints laid down by 6th century BC Persia, it completely shatters the old stereotype of irrational ancient despots ruling entirely by whim.
It really does.
What Cyrus and Darius actually pioneered were the exact administrative frameworks that we now consider uniquely modern. We're looking at massive state-funded infrastructure, highly efficient remote communication networks, and the legal protection of minority traditions to ensure overall state stability.
They essentially invented the mechanics of the modern state over 2.5 millennia ago.
Which leaves you with a rather profound question to consider.
If a civilization functioning over 2,500 years ago definitively proved that radical inclusion, cultural autonomy, and systemic investment in infrastructure created a far more stable and prosperous society than governing by fear and force, why do so many modern institutions and states still struggle to learn a lesson that Cyrus the Great figured out in 539 BC?
That is exactly the kind of question that makes digging into these sources so rewarding. You start out looking for ancient ruins, and you end up finding a mirror reflecting our own modern administrative struggles. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of empire. Keep questioning the blueprints of the world around you, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.